Good morning. You know, Christmas, as I just mentioned, is the season where we focus on giving and being generous. We talk about it's a time of goodwill and peace on earth. We're thankful for family and friends that are all around us. But can we just be honest today? You know, I'm a pastor. I'm supposed to be honest. I'm supposed to be truthful. I just want to be honest. I know that we have this phrase that we want to teach our kids. It's better to give than receive. But come on, I love getting gifts, right? Come on, you do too, don't you? I feel better saying that. It's okay. Maybe you just need to whisper it out. I love getting gifts. I love it when someone surprises me with a package. It's nicely wrapped and a bow on top. I feel better now. I hope you do too. But I love getting gifts. And, you know, some of the best gifts that I've got in my life happened at Christmas. I think about a time when I was a kid where I got a Transformer his name was Omega Supreme, and he was awesome. I mean, he was huge. Now, I don't know if he was really this big, but as you know, for a kid, he was ginormous, as we say. And he would transform into this like railroad track thing with a missile silo. It was awesome. I remember the Christmas when I got my first Sony Walkman. Come on. Put that thing on my on my hip, you know, walking around like I was all cool. I was not cool. The Sony Walkman, it was a desperate attempt at being cool, but it did not help. I remember one year when we got our Nintendo Entertainment System. Man, that was the greatest day of my life. It was awesome. It was awesome. So maybe you have got some great memories of some great gifts that you've received. Maybe it was something that you got that you didn't even realize you wanted, but once you received it, you thought, wow, what a great gift. Maybe you got one of the hot toys for the year that was hard to find, and you know when you opened that package that person had spent hours in line looking for it. Or maybe it was that kind of a gift. Maybe it was just something unexpected that you didn't realize that you wanted. You know, Christmas is about giving. But that's only because the greatest gift, the greatest gift that was ever given was given on the first Christmas. You see, Christmas is about the gift of Jesus. It's about the birth of a baby. Christmas was really originally, the only reason we give gifts now like this is to remember and reflect that we got the greatest gift on the first Christmas in the first place. Now, there are about 130 million babies that are born each year. 4 million babies alone are born in the U.S. So what is so important about the birth of a baby over 2,000 years ago? What is so important about the birth of Jesus? Now, we can certainly look at Jesus' life and his ministry. I mean, certainly it was significant in his day as he was living, walking here on earth. But his teachings and his work still ripples through time and history and even affects us. That's why we're here today. It still affects us to this moment here. And as important as Jesus' life is, we shouldn't miss the uniqueness and the extraordinary nature of his birth. I mean, his parents were nobodies. He was born on the outskirts of the backwoods of a small village, yet his arrival was heralded by angels. Kings heard of his birth and asked questions about it. Magi, wise men from about 1,000 miles away, found out about his birth and traveled to find him. And what I find even more fascinating about the birth of Jesus is that his birth was predicted over 700 years earlier by a prophet named Isaiah. In Isaiah chapter 7, verse 2, the prophet Isaiah says this. He says, "The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and will call him Emmanuel." Now, this is not the first time that Jesus' birth or arrival was predicted. You can go all the way back to Genesis chapter 3, verse 15 to find the first mention or the first hinting of the Messiah to come. All the way back in the first book of the Bible, 3rd chapter. 2 chapters after this, Isaiah expands on this prophecy about this child. He says this, "For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders. Now, there's a lot going on in just this short verse here. He says, first of all, that a child is born, speaking of the fact that speaking to the humanity of this child, the humanity of Jesus. But on the other hand, it says a son will be given, and that hints at his divinity. And notice, too, that it says the government will be on his shoulders. Now, Isaiah is prophesying about a future one to come, but he's also talking to a group of people that he's ministering to in Judah, during that time there. He's talking about another king as well. He's contrasting this ruler that's coming with the king that is already present. In the late 90s, I watched a TV special about prophets and prophecy. This was, like a few years before the year 2000, and everybody was kind of up in arms about the year 2000. This particular program was about a man named Nostradamus and his predictions of the end of the world happening in the year 2000. And everybody was kind of nervous, Y2K and all that kind of stuff was coming up. And so I watched this program, and the show was filled with ominous music, wisps of smoke. There was an actor who was portraying Nostradamus. He was in a dark room with candles around him, and he was peering into this mirror, trying to see the future in this mirror. He was dressed in dark clothes, ominous music, writing down all of these vague things about what he was seeing in the future. And I wonder sometimes if when we think about the prophets in the Bible, if we don't kind of have that picture of the prophets when we think of guys like Isaiah. In other words, we might think of Isaiah being in a room trying to predict the future and point ahead to some future time. But that's not really the case. Isaiah wasn't trying to predict the future. He was simply trying to speak God's word to the people that he was ministering to in his day. We think of prophecy in the Bible as, or just prophecy in general, but in the Bible as foretelling, predicting the future. And it does include that, but it's really just a small part of what Bible prophecy is all about. In the Bible, the prophet's primary function was not foretelling, but forthtelling, talking to the context that they were in. Now, there are certainly times when the foretelling and the forthtelling overlap, and that's what happens here in Isaiah. I mention this because I think there are times when we come to a text like this, in Isaiah chapter 9, and we read it very self-centeredly. We just read it and say, what does this mean to me? But the real thing that we should be asking of the text is, what did it mean to them? That grounds how we interpret that. That gives us a framework that we can then apply it to our own lives. And so what we're going to do throughout this series is we're going to look at this prophecy of Isaiah, and we're going to try to ground it a little bit in the time that Isaiah was prophesying, so we can understand what was going on in his day. So let's go back to the text. Isaiah 9:6. It says this, "For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace." Isaiah prophesied, he ministered in Judea, the southern kingdom, around 700 BC. And Isaiah's ministry was not easy. He faced a great deal of ridicule. He was ignored. The people that he was ministering to or trying to minister to, they were engaged in sin, and they had abandoned faithful worship of God. And really, it was largely influenced by their king at the time. Their king was a man named Ahaz, and Ahaz was by no means was he a good king. He was an awful king. Isaiah's prophecy is about a better king. And so when we read this, yes, Isaiah is talking about the future, but he's also talking to people who are in a very difficult situation. And so as we look at these titles over the next few weeks, we need to remember that Isaiah is promising something to the people of that day that carries on for us here as well. Each of the titles that are on the screen here, they kind of tell us something different about Jesus and who he is. Wonderful Counselor tells us about his qualifications for being a ruler. Mighty God tells us about his person and his power. Everlasting Father tells us about the relationship he has with his subjects. Prince of Peace talks about the society, the kind of society that his rule will create. And so today, we want to start by looking at that first title, Wonderful Counselor. These are the qualifications of his rule. This is who he is as a person. Now, this is a pretty straightforward description. We understand the words wonderful and counselor, but I kind of want to give some nuances for us today so we can kind of all be on the same page. The word wonderful in Hebrew comes from a word that means miraculous or unusual. And if you actually trace the use of this word in the Old Testament, you find that this word is often used for the works of God. So this is something really indescribable. We have a tendency to use the word wonderful in kind of a generic way. Oh, isn't that wonderful? You were able to get, an extra $5 off the thing you bought at the store. That's not really wonderful. I mean, it's nice, but in the wonderful in the sense here, this is like no other. Amazing. You can't even hardly describe it or speak about it. It's used of these miraculous works of God. The word counselor can trip us up a little bit. They didn't have professional counselors in those days where you would make an appointment and sit on a couch and talk with them about your problems or things. The word counselor here is used a little differently. It does have to do with advice or getting wisdom, but it's a word that is used of people in authority, people who are giving direction and leadership. So an advisor or a counselor would be someone that you would go to and they would tell you kind of how to live your life, or they would direct you. Now, I have a few friends that I will go to from time to time. 3 or 4 weeks ago, I just had a really difficult moment in my work as a pastor. And it was a difficult ministry moment. There were a couple of situations that were flying at me, fast and furious, and I wasn't really sure how to respond. And so what I did is I called a couple of friends, and I just had a conversation with them. And I just said, hey, I need to just get your perspective on this. I think it's really important for us to have people like that, but when you think of people that you go to for advice or you go to for counsel, what are you doing? You're kind of submitting yourself to them, right? I'm allowing you into my life. Now you tell me something. I'm going to share this situation with you. Now tell me what I'm not seeing. Give me perspective here. Give me some direction. Lead me in the right way. I'm in a really bad place right now, and I need you to help me get into a better place. That's kind of what a counselor or an advisor will do. We kind of humble ourselves and ask. Now, these are the traits of a counselor, someone who leads you out of fog, helps you find clarity, gives you perspective, they encourage you, they lift you up. Now, this is the description of Jesus. He is a wonderful, beyond all measure, above and far beyond any other advisor or counselor. He's good, amazing, great, indescribable. Now let's contrast that title with King Ahaz. We can read about King Ahaz in Chronicles and in the book of Kings, but let's look at 2 Kings chapter 16. It says this: Ahaz was 20 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 16 years. Unlike David, his father, he did not do what was right in the eyes of the Lord his God. Verse 3, he followed the ways of the kings of Israel and even sacrificed his son in the fire, engaging in the detestable practices of the nations the Lord had driven out before the Israelites. He offered sacrifices and burned incense at the high places, on the hilltops, and under every spreading tree. Okay, allow me to state the obvious. Ahaz was a wicked, evil king. It says he ignored the ways of his father David. He turned from them. He did not obey God. It says he offered sacrifices and burned incense on the high places. Those are pagan places. Those aren't the places that the Lord had told him to do. Those were the pagan gods that he was worshiping. He was leading the people astray. And it got so bad under Ahaz that at the end of chapter 8, in Isaiah describes the situation in the bleakest of terms. Isaiah 8:22. Then they will look towards the earth and see only distress and darkness and fearful gloom, and they will be thrust into utter darkness. This is the situation that Ahaz had led the people into. Utter darkness, deep despair, and gloom. Now, when I was in college, I went to Central Bible College in Springfield, Missouri, And down in that area, there are some caves. And so I've told some of these stories before, but when I was in college, my friends and I, we would go to these caves. They were on private property. It's amazing we never got caught or got in trouble. But we would go on these caves, and students, that's a bad example. You shouldn't do that. But it was a lot of fun. We would go to these caves. We'd drive like 30 or 40 minutes. I don't remember how far it was. And then we'd get out. We'd park on this, like in the middle of nowhere on the side of this road. And then we'd walk another like half mile to a mile to get to these caves. And we'd go in these caves. And I was home from school, and I was talking with one of my youth leaders. And he attended Evangel University, which is right there in Springfield. And I just mentioned that we would go to these caves, this particular cave. And he said, oh, when I was in school, I used to go to that cave too. He goes, in fact, I dated a girl once, and I tried to get her to come with us to go in these caves with us. And, just to join because they would go. And she refused. And he was like, why? It's a lot of fun. You should do this. And finally, she said, no, I don't want to go because I'm scared. She said a few years ago, I think she was dating another guy. I think it was like two couples or something. They went to this very same caves that I went to, and they went in, and I think there was 4 of them, and they had 2 flashlights, okay? So they're walking through the caves, climbing through the caves and all that, and one of the flashlights, the batteries died. So they were like, this is not good. Let's go ahead and let's get out of the cave right now because we only have 1 flashlight left. And they turned, and as they were climbing out, they dropped the other flashlight, and it broke. Okay, I know, yes, I know. Now look, some of you are going to be smart. You're thinking like, well, can't you just take the batteries out of the broken one and put them in I don't know any of those details, okay? I just know what my youth leader, a friend of mine, he heard from the girl he was dating, okay? This was her situation. So they were stuck in that cave. Maybe you've done those tours of caves, or maybe you've been in a cave like that. It is dark in those caves. I can't even imagine that situation, the feeling of hopelessness, that feeling of despair. You can't find your way out when you're in a situation like that. And Isaiah is describing that kind of situation. That's what their king had led them into. Darkness, gloom, a bleak existence. They were being threatened by the nations around them. We're going to talk about that in a couple of weeks, how 2 nations had come against them and attacked them, and they were trying to find help in other nations. Church, our world today is filled with darkness and despair. I mean, just this past year, just natural disasters. There's been a number of them that have devastated economies and families. We've had loss of life from it. Our country this past year has seen multiple mass shootings. I mean, don't they just seem to be happening more and more regularly? And it seems like they're happening in more and more places where we feel less safe and secure. There continues to be violence amongst races. The political divide is just as wide as ever, and our system sometimes seems hopelessly broken. And church, Isaiah's message is still as meaningful to us today as it was thousands of years ago. Verse 2 of chapter 9, Isaiah continues. He says, just after he talks about darkness, he says, the people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned. What is Isaiah's message? Light has come to us. There is hope on the horizon. You might be underneath the king and the rule and the reign of a king who is awful. He is evil. He is wicked. He has led you into darkness and despair. You're being attacked by the nations around you, but there is a king, he says, that is a wonderful counselor. There is a king that will lead you into the light. Hope is on the horizon. The government will be on his shoulders. This is highly charged language that Isaiah is using here in this text. Now, perhaps you feel like you are in darkness today. Now, maybe you're not the victim of racial violence or other kind of violence like that. Maybe you haven't been the victim of a natural disaster this past year. But perhaps you're facing darkness and gloom today. Maybe it is a health situation. Maybe you're facing the darkness of cancer. Or maybe a toxic relationship that is just sucking the life out of you. Maybe it's a loss of your job, financial problems. Look, Isaiah's message is for you too today. There is hope. there is a light that has come. There is a wonderful counselor. There is a king who can lead you into the light. And as great as this message gets, it gets even better. In verse 7 it says, of the greatness of his government and peace there will be no end. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing and upholding it with justice and righteousness from that time on and forever. And I love this last line. The zeal of the Lord Almighty will accomplish this. The zeal of the Lord Almighty will accomplish this. How do we move from darkness to light? By our own strength? By our own deeds? No, by the zeal of the Lord Almighty. He plans the future, he shatters the foe, and he keeps his promises. Now, that girl that was in that cave, I don't want to leave you hanging there, because some of you are like, what happened to her? She, apparently her roommate, or one of their roommates, realized the next day that they hadn't come back, and they knew that they were going to these caves. And so they called the authorities, and the authorities got some professional spelunkers, the cave explorers with all their gear and equipment, and they came in and rescued them. I'm telling you, if you've ever been, these caves that we were in, there were some spots where you would have to crawl on your belly to get from one big cavern to another cavern. There were splits. Nope. Some of you are like, nope. It was awesome. It was awesome. It was filled with clay, and jagged rocks and different entrances and pathways and tunnels. It was awesome. It was hard to get out with a flashlight. They were stuck in darkness. They could do nothing about it. It was complete despair. There was nothing. They needed someone to come in and bring them light, right? They need someone to go into that cave and then to lead them out of that cave. In John chapter 1, Jesus is called the light of mankind, the light of all mankind. He shines out, it says, and the darkness cannot overcome it. I'm telling you, even with one flashlight, it'll light up a cave, but the darkness can be so thick, it can be difficult. Jesus is better than the best flashlight in the middle of a cave. The darkness cannot stand against him. Look, I'm sure that those college students, they were hungry and thirsty and tired and scared. I heard that the girls that were there, they just sang worship songs all night to try to keep sane. I'm sure that they were hungry and tired, but the thing they needed most was to be brought into the light. Church, the Bible identifies our greatest need, the darkness that we faced. You see, the greatest problem that we face, or the greatest darkness that you and I face, is not which political party is in power. It wasn't whether it was King Ahaz or King David. King David had his share of problems, even though he's considered a great king. The greatest problem or the greatest darkness that we experience is not the results of a scan at the hospital. It's not the amount of money we do or don't have in our bank account. It's not the amount of friends we have or how young we look or how happy we are. The greatest darkness and problem that we face is our sin. Ephesians chapter 2, verses 1 and verse 3 says this, as for you, he's actually writing to a church. As for you, you were dead in your transgressions and sins. Verse 3, we were by nature deserving of wrath. See, that's the reality. Reality is we went into a cave ill-prepared and we found ourselves in darkness. We found ourselves the object, come on, when you go into a cave, have an extra flashlight, bring extra batteries, bring an extra bulb, bring a whole pack of flashlights, We got ourselves into our predicament of death because of our sin and because of our choices. It continues in verses 4 and 5. But, and I love it when there's a but like that in the scriptures, but because of his great love for us, God, who is rich in mercy, made us alive with Christ even when we were dead in transgressions. It is by grace that you have been saved. God's love intervened when we needed it most, not when we deserved it, not based on what we had done, but because of God's grace. Jesus, the light of the world, came to our rescue when we were stuck in the darkness of the cave. This is a significant enough gift, right? For that alone, the fact that Jesus would rescue us out of darkness is amazing, and he's worthy of worship for that. But again, it continues. There's more. Verse 6 and 7. What does he do? He rescues us from darkness, and then verse 6. And God raises us up with Christ and seats us with him in the heavenly realms in Christ Jesus, in order that in the coming ages he might show the incomparable riches of his grace expressed in his kindness to us in Christ Jesus. The greatness of the gift of Jesus is not simply that we are brought out of darkness of the cave, but we are seated in heavenly places as well. We are raised up to be with our wonderful counselor. Our wonderful counselor leads us not just out of darkness, but into light. Come on, this is great news. This is a good gift. This stands in contrast to Ahaz. Now, there are all sorts of different King Ahazes. I gotta be careful how I say that. There's in the world today. And they will lead you astray, and they will lead you to darkness. And some of us today, I talk with Matt about where we're going. Matt is our worship leader. I put like our titles out, and he knows kind of where we're going with things. He didn't know we were going to talk about darkness and light today. But I think every song we sang up to this point mentioned something about darkness and light. Okay, man, my heart has been burning this week with this message. Matt comes in, and he's prayerfully selecting songs, and he picks songs that are right in theme. I believe that there are people today that are in this room, you feel like you are in darkness, and I want you to know the first Christmas provides you with the hope of light. It provides you with the hope to come out of the cave. You might feel like you're overwhelmed and there's nothing, you're just despair and all these things. I'm telling you, there is hope if you put your trust in him. Not because of your works, not because you deserve it, not because of your grace, not because of you're great, but because of God's grace. Verse 8 and 9, for it is by grace that you have been saved through faith. This is not from yourselves. It is the gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast. That's our hope. That's our wonderful counselor at work. That's the great gift of Christmas. And not by our own accomplishments, but the zeal of the Lord that accomplishes it on our behalf. Not because we're good enough. Not because you said the right words in a prayer. Not because you did enough good religious deeds. But because of God's grace. He is worthy of worship and he is worthy of praise. So there's two responses for us today. And the first, very simple, accept the gift of Jesus. Accept it today. Accept it. And now, normally on a Sunday morning, this first response is usually aimed and targeted directly at those who do not have a relationship with God. And this does apply for those. If you're here today and you don't know God and you're far from him, you're not a believer, today I want to encourage you, accept the gift of Jesus. When you call on the name of the Lord, you'll be saved. But can I just speak to highly religious types in the room here today? We need to accept the gift of Jesus as well. Because Ephesians is all about, that whole passage we just read was, hey, your works don't save you. Your goodness doesn't save you. And what the danger is for some of us who've been in the church a long time is we begin to kind of go, man, I got this church thing down. Yeah, I attended. I had perfect attendance this year at church. Man, I sang those songs really good. I closed my eyes and I raised my hands even. And man, God must really love me. No, God doesn't love you because you do those things. He loved you when those things weren't even on your mind, when you were dead in your sins. That's how great God's love is for you. That's what his grace is. And so some of us today, yes, if you're far from God, you need to accept that gift. But some of us, we think we're close to God, but we've distanced ourselves because we stop trusting in his grace and we start trusting in our works. And church, that's a precarious position to be in. And so today, if maybe you've just got yourself a little puffed up today, and I know it's hard to admit with yourself, trust in God's grace. Trust in the gift of Jesus for you. The second response, I think again, is pretty obvious. Thank God for the gift of Jesus. Thank him, and thank him some more. That word wonderful, it's indescribable. So get started. Start trying to fully describe how wonderful of a counselor he is. You're never going to do it. That's why eternity will never be boring. That's why heaven will never be boring, because we're going to enter into his presence and we're going to see our wonderful counselor and we're going to realize, I didn't realize that about you. That is amazing. Oh, there's more to you. You're infinite. That is amazing as well. And we are going to spend our time in eternity being fascinated, overjoyed, in awe at how wonderful and mighty our counselor is as he continues to lead us into his light. It's going to be a fascinating experience for us, but that happens for those who accept the gift. And today, I just want to encourage you. If you are in darkness, there is hope. If you are in darkness because of sin, there is light available to you when you call out on the name of the Lord, and you will be saved. And church, let's be grateful for gifts. You know, when you give gifts, or when you get gifts, you know, you need to be thankful. You know, write a thank you letter or whatever. Let's be the kind of people that respond and thank him for what he's done for us. Let's